What's going on YouTube? Listen up, young elder gang. This is Dr. Michael Carter at you with another banger. Please make sure you like, subscribe, and share this video, fam. I hope this video get at least 100,000 likes. In this video, you will find history, definitions, scripture information, and best of all, what we Americans have been deprived of from the beginning, the truth. Keep in mind, this content used in this video is intended for entertainment, educational, and informational purposes only. We will give you the total truth as we best understand it today. Be sure to hit that like button, young elder gang. Hit that subscribe button if you're new to the channel. Hit that bell, and don't forget to check back with us every day for new content. All right, let's get started. The colonial era began in approximately 1478 and lasted well into the end of the 1900s when decolonization efforts began to take place. This era was dominated by European Moors, characterized by the large empires spawned from states like Spain, Portugal, France, the UK, and the Netherlands. In fact, over the course of this 400 years, only 5 countries completely escaped European influence. The colonial expansion of European Moors had its foundations in brutality, not limited to such things as forced removal of indigenous people, separation of families, and in some extreme cases, even genocide. Stop thinking science is just about discoveries. Sometimes it's about domination. Here's how colonial powers twisted science for control. Colonial powers didn't just conquer lands, they exploited science to cement their rule. Picture this: European scientists classifying plants and minerals but ignoring indigenous knowledge. Why? To extract resources like quinine for malaria protection. Medical research was another tool, focused on keeping colonial troops healthy, often at the expense of local populations. And then there's parachute science, where researchers parachuted into colonies, extracted data, and left without giving back. Even Darwin's famous voyage on the HMS Beagle wasn't just about evolution. It was a British mission to survey and exploit South America. Botanical gardens? More like economic treasure troves for colonizers. The result? Exploitative research practices that ignored and undermined local expertise. You have the Lewis and William Clark expedition. They were black Moors and colonizers. Meriwether Lewis and William Clark were representatives of the USA Corporation of the early 1800s, which was built on territorial expansion and commercial gain. Their expedition was a major chapter in USA exploration history, and their methods were based on colonization science, which involved observing, collecting, documenting, and classifying the indigenous peopleland. When you think of the science of colonization, remember, it's not always for the greater good. Sometimes it's a tool for control and usurpation. A colonizationist is a person who supports colonization, which is the act of one nation controlling another people or area. Colonizers often use force to take control of a country or area, and then send people from their own country to live there. Colonization can involve the exploitation of people and resources, and the establishment of an imperialist regime. Colonizers may consider the people and societies they conquer to be inferior to themselves in legal, social, cultural, administrative, or biological terms. Colonization can also take the form of settler colonialism, where the colonizers invade and occupy a territory, replacing the existing society with their own. This can sometimes lead to the genocide of the native population. In the United States, the American Colonization Society, ACS, was formed and supported by many people, including President Thomas Jefferson. The ACS's goal was to move the so-called free black population, who were really the native indigenous people, out of the country. However, abolitionists saw the ACS as a way for so-called slaveholders to maintain so-called slavery. Keep in mind, we don't believe their slave narrative. They believed that education was important for integrating free so-called black people into American society, and that this would make it more difficult to send them to Africa. Truth is, they couldn't send you to Africa because you're not from Africa. So what did they do? They started building prisons for the native. Why do you think 85% of the prison population is American Nubians who are really the native? Ask yourself how many Africans you see in so-called American prisons. Colonialism is a policy where one country seeks to extend political or economic authority over the people and physical territory of another country. Generally, economic dominance and exploitation of resources is the primary aim of a country indulging in colonialism. The purposes of colonialism included economic exploitation of the colony's people and natural resources, meaning steal their mineral rights, creation of new markets for the colonizer, and extension of the colonizer's way of life to populations beyond its national borders. Throughout the colonial period, science was strongly linked to the expansion of Moorish European empires. From the very beginning of this period, when European Moors explorers were first venturing into the wider world, science was present in the fields of navigation, astronomy, and in the development of new instruments. The long voyages necessitated more advanced navigational procedures, and so the scientists who journeyed with the explorers of the early colonial period had to refine their technology to make accurate astronomical observations and more accurate maps. Adis describes how science was conducted both pre- and post-industrial revolution. Before the Industrial Revolution, scientists in the colonies were more concerned with natural history, collecting botanical samples, map-making and cartography, and classifying different species of wildlife. However, after the Industrial Revolution, the focus shifted to fields such as geology, mineralogy, chemistry, and engineering, fields which delivered more concrete benefits to the colonial powers. Harrison, 2005, concurs, saying that colonialism was vital to the development of such fields. The Science of Colonizationists refers to the way colonial powers utilize scientific knowledge, primarily in fields like botany, geology, and medicine, to exploit and extract resources from colonized territories, often prioritizing economic gain over the well-being of local populations, essentially using science as a tool to further their imperialistic goals. This practice is often called scientific colonialism. Science has no nation, but nations have science, and in the era of European imperialism beginning in the last quarter of the 19th century, there arose an interest in making science serve the interests of imperial efficiency and colonial development. The interest was fresh, but hardly new, as for over 2 centuries, the nations of Western Europe, initially led by Iberia, had sought outposts for trade and strategic settlement. Whatever their original differences in motives and means, whether souls, gold, or spices, by the late 18th century, and whatever their allegiances to economic doctrine, Western Europeans were united on the principle by which colonies served as plantations or primary producers for the trade or manufacturing industries of the metropolis. Within this context, however, there grew a diverse range of rational projects which we collectively label colonial science, and which were given their most distinctive forms in the colonial projections of Britain, France, and Germany. These persisted, albeit with important modifications, until the end of the Second World War. Today, this subject is sufficient to attract an international audience. Once upon a time, this was not so. Indeed, until the 1,970% selling the history of colonial science to historians of science was like selling a little-known commodity low in a falling market. In the last 10 years, however, for reasons which we may well want to examine, the meanings of this process have become increasingly interesting to historians of science in Europe, the subcontinent, and the Americas. At the same time, there are several schools of interpretation competing for attention. For some, colonial science is a museum of the moving image in which Europeans are displayed constantly moving south and east. To others, the important narratives are those in which ambitious locals use scientific knowledge to help frame a response to the external domination of an international culture. What is problematic about this process has been the subject of growing concern, spurred by conferences in 1981 in Melbourne and 1990 in Paris, as historians have exposed a range and variety of colonial experience, reflecting to some extent contrasting cultures, questions, and styles in historical research. Decolonizing science is the process of challenging the colonial and racist legacy of Western science and creating a more inclusive and ethical scientific community. Decolonizing science means taking indigenous knowledge seriously. Decolonization not only requires greater inclusion of marginalized knowers, but it also requires that systems are put in place that enable and fund indigenous-led and conceptualized research and policy-making processes. Recognize the role of colonialism. Colonialism has influenced the subjects that scientific research focuses on, the perspectives it prioritizes, and the way research is conducted. Include marginalized perspectives. Decolonizing science requires including marginalized knowers and funding research and policymaking led by indigenous communities. Create a multi-paradigmatic space. Decolonizing science involves creating a space where different ways of knowing can be equally valued and new knowledge can be co-created. Deconstruct biases. Decolonizing science requires constantly deconstructing biases and recognizing the complexity of the process. Some examples of decolonizing science include examining how numbers are written and math operations work to show their cultural nature, discussing how an Indian philosopher proposed what looks like Newton's first law of motion over 1,000 years earlier, building mechanisms to strengthen local research and develop scientific talent. Resource extraction. The primary focus was identifying and extracting valuable natural resources like plants, minerals, and timber to fuel the industrial development of the colonizing nation. Resource extraction is the process of removing natural resources from the environment for human use. It can include activities like mining, drilling, quarrying, harvesting, fishing, and logging. Resource extraction can have significant environmental and social impacts, including pollution. Resource extraction can pollute the air, water, and soil with acids, heavy metals, and other chemicals. Ecosystem disruption. Resource extraction can disrupt local ecosystems. Worker injuries. Resource extraction can lead to worker injuries and health damage. Human rights violations. Resource extraction can lead to human rights violations. Biodiversity loss. Resource extraction and processing account for over 90% of land use-related biodiversity loss. The scale and diversity of resource extraction has increased over time and is a defining feature of the Anthropocene. The extraction and processing of materials, fuels, and food contribute to half of total global greenhouse gas emissions. The extraction of resources refers to the withdrawing of materials from the environment for human use, including fossil fuels, oil, gas, and coal, rocks and minerals, biomass via deforestation and fishing and hunting, and water. Taxonomic classification. Colonial scientists categorized and classified flora and fauna in colonized regions, often without acknowledging indigenous knowledge systems that already existed. Taxonomic classification is a hierarchical system for organizing living things into groups based on their characteristics. The system is organized like a funnel, with levels that become more specific as you move down. Domain, the broadest level, including millions of organisms. Kingdom, a level below domain. Phylum, a level below kingdom. Class, a level below phylum. Order, a level below class. Family, a level below order. Genus, a level below family. Species, the most specific level, including only one type of organism. Taxonomic hierarchy stock illustrations. 17 taxonomic. The term taxonomy comes from the Greek words taxis, arrangement, and nomos, law. The Swedish naturalist Carl Linnaeus pioneered the taxonomic system in the 1700s, based on organism morphology. The system is still used today, but scientists continue to revise the categories as they learn more about living things. Scientists use binomial nomenclature to identify organisms, which includes the genus and species name. For example, the scientific name for a bush baby is Galago calenus, where Galago is the genus and Calenus is the species. Medical research. Medical research in colonies often focused on diseases prevalent among colonial populations and soldiers, with limited consideration for local health needs. Medical research means investigations, experiments, and studies to discover, develop, or verify knowledge relating to the causes, diagnosis, treatment, prevention, or control of human physical or mental diseases and impairments. Medical research, or biomedical research, also known as health research, refers to the process of using scientific methods with the aim to produce knowledge about human diseases, the prevention and treatment of illness, and the promotion of health. Basic biomedical research, which addresses mechanisms that underlie the formation and function of living organisms, ranging from the study of single molecules to complex integrated functions of humans, contributes profoundly to our knowledge of how disease, trauma, or genetic defects alter normal physiological and behavioral processes. Recent advances in molecular biology techniques and characterization of the human genome, as well as the genomes of an increasing number of model organisms, have provided basic biomedical researchers with the tools to elucidate molecular, cellular, and systems-level processes at an unprecedented depth and rate. While clinical research focuses on the direct application of knowledge to improve patient care, basic science research delves into understanding the underlying mechanisms of diseases and biological processes. Justification of dominance. Scientific findings were sometimes used to justify colonial rule by portraying colonized people as inferior or primitive, based on racialized interpretations of scientific data. Justification of dominance refers to the idea that certain ideologies and beliefs help maintain social hierarchies. These beliefs and ideologies can include social dominance orientation, SDO, the belief that advantaged groups should dominate less powerful groups, and a preference for hierarchy-based interactions. System justification, SJ. The belief that status differences are fair and merited and that the hierarchical status quo is legitimate. These beliefs are often associated with right-wing or conservative political positions. For example, in the United States, the belief in equal opportunity can legitimize inequality by suggesting that people who are not doing well economically are not taking advantage of equal opportunity. Social dominance theory suggests that legitimizing ideologies help coordinate beliefs and actions that maintain the hierarchy. For example, the status legitimacy hypothesis predicts that people who justify the system will minimize discrimination among the disadvantaged but be sensitive to signs of reverse discrimination among the advantaged. Unethical practices. Colonial scientists often conducted research without the consent or participation of local communities, leading to exploitation and disregard for indigenous knowledge systems. Unethical practices are behaviors that fall below the minimum standards of a business code of conduct or that are widely considered to be morally wrong. Some examples of unethical practices include unfair competition, when a business acts in an unethical or immoral manner, or in a way that is not legal and does not compete on equal terms with its competitors. Unsubstantiated claims, when an unscientific trial exposes patients to an experimental drug without leading to any useful knowledge. Bribery, when an organization or its employees accept or pay bribes, which abuses the trust that business relationships rely on. Data privacy violations, when a company accesses confidential customer data or trade secrets surreptitiously, or engages in covert monitoring of competitors or their employees. Environmental harm, when nature is destroyed, depriving living things of their right to life. Selling customer data, when a company sells customer data without permission to increase profit, which breaks customer trust and can cause business losses. Unethical accounting, when an individual or organization intentionally violates standard accounting principles, ethical guidelines, or legal requirements related to financial information. False advertising, when a business engages in deceptive advertising which violates consumer trust, undermines the integrity of the business, and can have negative consequences for the brand. Power imbalances. The knowledge produced was primarily used to benefit the colonizing power, furthering the power imbalance between colonizer and colonized. A power imbalance is being expressed when one partner, or a group of partners, is able to dominate decision-making or otherwise asserts power in ways that disadvantages other partners or are not in the best interest towards achieving the partnership objectives. A power imbalance occurs when one person or group has more power than another, which can manifest in many ways. Relationships. Power imbalances can occur in romantic, familial, or friendship relationships. They can be caused by differences in age, financial status, authority, education, social connections, or physical strength. Signs of a power imbalance include unequal participation, feelings of resentment, overdependence, and constant apologizing. Workplace. Power imbalances can occur in the workplace, where one person may have more power than another due to their job title, experience, or authority. To address power imbalances in the workplace, it's important to promote transparency and open communication. Systems of power imbalances can also occur on a macro level, such as between majority and minority groups, or between governments and people groups. Recognizing power imbalances can be challenging, especially when they are subtle or normalized. Some ways to address power imbalances include acknowledging the power difference between you and the other party, defining the power dynamics and recognizing how they show up in day-to-day relationships. Promoting a culture of transparency and open communication. Ecological science, also simply called ecology, is the scientific study of the relationships between living organisms, including humans and their physical environment, examining how organisms interact with each other and their surroundings at various levels, from individual organisms to entire ecosystems, to understand the complex connections within the natural world. Essentially, it's the study of how life interacts with its environment. Ecology is the study of the relationships between living organisms, including humans, and their physical environment. It seeks to understand the vital connections between plants and animals and the world around them. Legacy of scientific racism. Scientific findings were sometimes used to reinforce racist ideologies, contributing to the justification of colonial domination. Early statistical health data was weaponized against Black Americans in the late 1800s, as it was used to claim they were predisposed to disease and destined for extinction. By the early to mid-20th century, polygenism and biology-based racism were widely disproven, and racism in social science had gained popularity. Black people have been the victims of mistaken identity in the criminal justice system, been improperly rejected for home loans, and have had to be deemed much sicker than white patients to be recommended for the same level of health care. The scientific revolution laid the foundations for the Age of Enlightenment, which centered on reason as the primary source of authority and legitimacy, and emphasized the importance of the scientific method. Ethnic studies, in the United States, is the interdisciplinary study of difference, chiefly race, ethnicity, and nation, but also sexuality, gender, and other such markings, and power as expressed by the state, by civil society, and by individuals.